and welcome to this latest episode of the Driving the Profit with Zero Emissions podcast. I'm Barbara Albert, the co-CEO of 100% Renewables, a consultancy specializing in helping our clients to decarbonize. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of speaking with Scenic World, Australia's most visited privately owned tourism attraction, nestled in the heart of the breathtaking Blue Mountains. Since 1945, Scenic World has been inviting visitors to embark on a journey through one of Australia's most iconic natural wonders. But Scenic World is more than just a tourist destination. As a responsible tourism business, they are deeply committed to minimizing the carbon footprint and serving as environmental stewards for future generations. Today, we're excited to discuss Scenic World's strategic commitment to environmental stewardship, embodied in the environment and sustainability policy, and that journey towards achieving carbon neutral certification. Joining me today is Anthea Hammond, Managing Director at Scenic World Blue Mountains and Vice President of Blue Mountains Tourism. Anthea brings a wealth of experience and expertise to the table, with her leadership instrumental in guiding Scenic World towards sustainable practices and unparalleled visitor experiences. As Managing Director, she has played a pivotal role in shaping the vision and direction of Scenic World, ensuring that it remains at the forefront of ecotourism. Additionally, her role as Vice President of Blue Mountains Tourism underscores her commitment to enhancing tourism, also with a focus on sustainability, in the World Heritage listed Blue Mountains region of New South Wales, Australia. Hi, Anthea, and welcome to the Driving Net Profit with Zero Emissions podcast.
Thank you.
We're really excited to explore Scenic World today. For our listeners that don't really know what Scenic World is, could you describe what you offer to the world?
So Scenic World is a nature-based attraction located in the Blue Mountains, about an hour and a half west of Sydney. We have a couple of cable cars as well as the world's steepest funicular train, the Scenic Railway, and it really gives an opportunity for our guests to enjoy the World Heritage area that is the Blue Mountains in a eco-friendly and super picturesque way.
Yeah, I can attest to that. It's amazing. Why are the Blue Mountains actually called the Blue Mountains?
The Blue Mountains are blue because when you look out across the valleys, they have a blue haze, which is caused by the eucalyptus oil being atomized into the air by the sun. And the light reflecting off that, called the Rayleigh effect, creates the Blue Mountains.
Yeah, and it's a stunning scenery. I go to the Blue Mountains probably 3-4 times a year because I love it that much. It's a wonderful experience. So when visitors come to your place, you mentioned the cable cars and the steep railway. How can people picture the experience? Can you take us through that?
Sure. So Scenic World has, as I said, the funicular and a couple of cable cars, as well as 1.4 kilometres of boardwalk through our temperate rainforest. So people come and they buy an unlimited ride ticket, so they get to go on the rides as many times as they like while they're on site. Most people will go down the Scenic Railway or down the cableway, then they'll spend time enjoying the rainforest down in the valley, and then often finish the day with a ride out on the Skyway, which is a horizontal cable car that goes out over a U-shaped valley with beautiful views of Katoomba Falls, the Three Sisters, and the Jamison Valley.
Obviously, all iconic spots for our overseas visitors and even domestic ones. So how was Scenic World established? Can you tell us a bit more about your history? I think it was your grandfather who actually started everything. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so grandfather turned what was a coal mine into Scenic World. So in the 1880s, a man named John Briddy North started the coal mine here, not particularly environmentally friendly, but it was the 1880s, and they mined coal on the site until the 1940s. During the 1920s and 30s, they started pulling tourists out of the valley, first using coal skips, and then they built a little 12-passenger car that they'd put on the rails on the weekend. And so in 1945, the war was winding up, and my grandfather, who was involved, he was a bit of an entrepreneur around town, so he was involved in moving the coal from then the mine up to the rail sidings, and he saw an opportunity to use it as a tourist attraction 7 days a week. And so when the mining lease came up for sale, he bought the mining lease, but never with the intention to do any mining, just to run the Scenic Railway. So he started running the Scenic Railway 7 days a week. He then built the Scenic Skyway in 1958, mainly from disused parts of an old shale mine, which is pretty inventive and pretty impressive for the late 1950s. And then Scenic World grew from there. So my father undertook a huge regenerative project across the site for about 15 years through the late 90s and early 2000s. And then my brother and I came in and took over the site in the mid 2000s. So since then, we've been busy creating lifelong memories for our visitors.
What an incredible history, especially from a climate change perspective. So it used to be a coal mine, and now it's this amazing tourist destination that showcases the beauty of the natural scenery being the Blue Mountains. What a turnaround. And the innovation that your grandfather had in reusing things that were already there to build something new and innovative.
Yeah,
and that's
very much the philosophy of what we still do today to upcycle and make sure we're getting the best use out of assets that we have here on site.
Let's talk a bit more about your sustainability efforts. So I've known you for so many years, and I know your sustainability efforts go back probably decades, because it's actually ingrained in the way you guys think and act. Please tell us more about your focus on ESG and what it means for your organization, for your values, what you represent as an organization.
Absolutely. I mean, we are a business on the edge of a World Heritage Area, and it comes back all the way to our why statement. Our why statement is that we're custodians of our site for the next generation, and we're here to share our little patch of the planet with those who want to come. So the very reason we exist is to help share our natural environment with people. And so that going along with that is obviously a real passion for the environment that we're in. It's one of our core values here at Scenic World is passionate about our environment, along with always evolve and our people come first. So when you combine those three, it really gives us a great impetus to be caring for country, caring for our sustainability and our environment, and making sure that we're continually evolving that. To your point, we have been doing this for decades. We've been advanced ecotourism certified through Ecotourism Australia for 20 years this year, which is a very exciting milestone for us. We had a big audit late last year and passed that with flying colours. So we're really proud that it's been such a long time that we've been building sustainability and caring for country here at Scenic World. And, it goes from all things big and small, but really aligns very well with our values and the values that our visitors expect us to be living by as well.
Definitely, that really resonates with me, that custodianship, that stewardship of the natural environment that you operate in. And you mentioned caring for country. I think from our discussions, you have an indigenous officer. I'm not quite sure what his role is, but can you tell us more about that role, what he does, and what caring for country actually means for Scenic World?
Yeah, so a relatively new role here at Scenic World. We were so pleased to be able to employ one of the local Indigenous elders, Uncle David King, here at Scenic World about just over 12 months ago now. And it took a bit of convincing him to come and work for us, and for him to understand what we really were after. And I had a couple of coffees with David and said, well, what I really want for the role is to break it into 3 sections. So a third of it is developing an Indigenous product to offer to our visitors, which is really important for visitors to start getting a better Indigenous connection within the mountains. There's not a lot of Indigenous products up here. And the second part I said was to help tourism and to help the broader community. So David King was already doing a lot of work, a lot of consultation in community, but he was trying to juggle that with a full-time role. So I said, I really want that benefit that you can give community as an elder to be part of your role here. So, roughly a third of your time, David goes and does land care at the local high school and those sorts of opportunities to engage with community and help in the community get that connection to our Indigenous elders. And then the last third was caring for country. So how on site are we looking after country better, and how can we work and make sure that we are those custodians and making the bit of environment that we have here at Scenic World better for the next generation. And David's done some phenomenal work. We've got an upland hanging swamp here on site, which is not super rare in the mountains, but they are generally a pretty rare type of little ecosystem. And Obviously, there's a lot of threats to those habitats from urban runoff, and David's connected with UWS or Western Sydney Uni, and have joined up with a professor there, and they're researching the swamp and how we can make it more healthy. So there's some really great grassroots initiatives that have taken place since David's been here to make sure we're really making our environment here at Scenic World the best it can be.
Yeah, incredible. So talking about or shifting our focus now to emission sources that you have. I mean, when you come to Scenic World as a visitor, it's hard to picture emission sources that are associated with your operations, etc. So what exactly constitutes your carbon footprint? What are the emission sources that you guys have?
Yeah, so the top 4 emission sources we have are firstly customer travel. It's no great surprise. 50% of visitors to Scenic World are international guests. And so a portion of their time is spent getting to Scenic World, a portion of their flight, a portion of their bus trip or their car trip. So that's by far our biggest scope 3 emission. And then following that is our capital expenditure. Again, not surprising for a business like ours. We have to generally continue to renew the site. We have to invest in infrastructure. We have to invest in creating that amazing visitor experience. The next one is gas, which again, not completely surprising, although something we are working to phase out as we move forward. And then the last one is waste. Also probably not that surprising when you think about it. We have 1 million visitors to Scenic World a year, and they all go to the bathroom, they all buy a coffee, and so waste is an area that I think has a lot of low-hanging fruit in it still, even though we've been working on it. You'll notice electricity isn't there, and that's because we've been buying green power now for the last 5 or more years since BC, before COVID, I call it. So it's already even coming into becoming carbon neutral is one of we didn't have to offset that, which was excellent.
Yeah, incredible. Because I know that you guys shifted to green power quite a while ago, and you're actually accepting an additional cost to the business because of that. Because your green power contract is a bit more expensive than a conventional electricity contract, but you're shouldering that as an organization. Why?
For us, it's about just doing the right thing. It's the low hanging fruit. It's hard work to. We've just been through the process of becoming carbon neutral, but there's a lot to that. And buying green power was really one of the easiest things to do because it was just going to cost us more money. So whilst the business was profitable enough to support that, we made that decision. And even when the business then went through COVID and probably wasn't profitable enough to support it, we did it anyway because we were already doing it, and we didn't want to go back from where we were. So really important for us to make that decision. And helpfully, it's one of the easier ones you can make as a business.
Yeah, it's one of the easy things to get rid of as an emission source, because electricity consumption, you can shift your supply to come from renewables immediately, reducing it to zero in terms of emissions, which is great. But you guys have actually a lot of electricity consumption, because the cable car, the train, etc., they use quite a bit of electricity, don't they?
They do, although not quite as much as you think, because both the rides that go into the valley actually regenerate electricity and push it back out into the grid. So we are actually our own green power generator through gravity. The both rides create about 30% of the energy that they use going uphill. They create 30% of that going downhill. So pretty efficient considering they're not designed to generate electricity, but it certainly helps us moderate our electricity usage. Yeah.
Great engineering accomplishment. I really love how this works. So there's a lot of emission sources that you just mentioned that come from all sorts of data points. How do you keep track of all those emission sources internally? How do you make sure that that you know where to look and keep track of it? How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a process to get to the point where we have been able to accurately track our emission sources, and thanks to 100% renewables, we're doing a lot better than we have been. One of the main ways we do it is through our finance team. So they've been working really hard to pull it all out of our invoicing. We did recently change waste companies, and one of the KPIs of that changeover was to get better waste reporting data, because it is in our top 4 emissions. We really wanted to make sure that we understood that so that we can then understand where to focus and and change how we do things.
So if I remember that correctly, it's all about collecting the weight of the waste, correct? Because when you start, developing emissions from waste and you only have volume, there's so many assumptions that go into the waste calculation. And it all becomes so much more accurate if you switch from volume to waste. So that's one of the initiatives you've put in place. Waste, obviously, and electricity have always been a big focus of yours. You mentioned previously that you've got targets around waste. What sorts of targets do you have overall?
Overall, our waste targets is to try and reduce our waste by 10%. Within that, though, there's some great low-hanging fruit. For example, we sell popcorn here at Scenic World, and at the moment, popcorn comes in a box. But when that box goes into the waste, it's really bulky. So we're in the process of transitioning to popcorn bags rather than boxes, because people will scrunch it up. Its volume will be about a tenth the size, and it can go into the waste that way. So it's not necessarily, it will save a little bit of weight, not heaps. But at the end of the day, the bulk is also a problem when it comes to transporting waste and the amount of volume that you have to send off the site. So there's definitely some low-hanging fruit. And the other one is soft plastics. We know there was a bit of a soft plastics problem in Australia for a little while, but again, that change of supplier for us in our waste stream has meant that we can go back to recycling soft plastics. And yep, it's absolutely vital that we start hitting that further up the supply chain so they're not coming into the business at all. But it's been really nice to get back to being able to recycle those soft plastics, because they are one of our bigger waste streams at Scenic World.
And really hard to recycle. So one of the big challenges that you have as a tourism operator is that you're not just dealing with your own staff, who it's easier to influence. You're dealing with the broader community, your visitors that come to your place. How can you, like, waste, of course, or of these visitors is problematic, getting them to sort waste, just generally the waste that comes from so many people. How can one deal with that as a tourism operator? Because it's a bit outside of your direct influence. How does one approach that?
Yeah, it's challenging, and it's a challenge we have every day on site. International guests don't necessarily understand how recycling works in Australia versus how it might work in their country. So there's a few things we do. We obviously have segregated bins across site, which work most of the time okay. But in our food courts, we make sure that we clear the tables. And that way we can do the sorting. That is the largest area of waste in the business. It is out of our cafe and our Eats 270 area. And so by us having team members that clear those tables and make sure they're sorting recyclables and organics as well as general waste, it means that those waste streams are much better separated when they get into the waste. We should also add the other big waste thing that we have is a wonderful machine called Audrey, or the Pulp Master 5000, that chews up all our organic waste and turns it into a pulp that then gets trucked out and turned into fertilizer. So our organic waste we try and avoid all organic waste going into our general waste stream.
Which is a great emissions reduction initiative, because organic waste has, of course, a lot of carbon in it, which then when it decomposes creates a lot of methane when it goes to landfill. So it's one of the most important things to separate out the organic content from other stuff that might get then recycled or go to landfill. It's really, really tricky to address that. So I was just pondering on the fact that you devote extra staff time to clear the tables so you can separate the waste into the waste streams. Obviously, that's an increased business cost for you, but then you weigh that against values that you have and the waste separation. So how do you make that decision as a business? How does that come about? Because obviously cost versus values, and you make the decision in favor of your values. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I think that's 100% what we do. We weigh it up and go, well, that's nice, but we have this commitment to be improving our environment and the ecotourism certification, as well as our reducing our waste for climate active. And so I think it makes it a relatively easy decision. We generally are a business that looks at, it sounds so old school, but triple bottom line when we're making those decisions. It's not only about what's more profitable or not. And at the end of the day, it's a better customer experience by having a team member out on the floor being able to help answer questions. Where are you going next, guys? Can I help you to the next ride? Yes, they're clearing tables, but they're also delivering a customer experience. And so it serves multiple purposes, and it's always about, well, what value? They're not just adding a cost to the business, they're adding a whole bunch of value, and value comes in multiple ways: customer experience, better waste management. And so we look at that, and on balance, it's much better to have that person doing that job for us.
Yeah, so basically, would you say then it's opening your eyes to tangible and intangible benefits, to live your values, to operate according to your values, and then to look at all that as a package and not in isolation. It's super important. So let's talk more about your staff. Obviously, your staff is a very engaged crowd of people. How do you ensure that they live the values? Because by having interacted with your team, they're all incredibly passionate. They're all very much sustainability focused. How do you attract these people, and what makes them so sustainability focused as a team?
I mean, I think what's really helpful for us is that we live in the Blue Mountains, and all our team are local within, they all live within the Blue Mountains, or if so, not far out of the edges. And one of the benefits of living in the Blue Mountains is that you live within this environment. So finding people that are passionate about our environment is really pretty easy to do, to be honest. And we're really blessed in that. We have a pretty thorough recruitment process, and as soon as people start, they're taken through an induction, and that induction immediately starts talking about our values, our environment. It all starts with our why statement that I mentioned earlier. So from very early on, our team understand that we're here because we're passionate about our environment, and it's so easy for them to get on board. Kids in the Blue Mountains grow up bushwalking and enjoying the environment. They're connected to it through school, and so they want to work somewhere that loves where they live, and so it makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And you are in a lucky position to be situated in such a gorgeous area of New South Wales, of Australia, and that you have staff that feel so connected to the land and feels those values of sustainability within them. But what would you recommend other businesses do? So say businesses that are situated in the CBD somewhere, that have staff that live in crowded spaces, not in the beautiful environment such as the Blue Mountains, that live in apartment blocks, that commute to work. Maybe these people don't feel the connection to land as much. How can you, what would you recommend bigger organizations do in terms of staff engagement and making sure that sustainability values are lived and felt by staff?
I think it's about getting them to understand the why. So that's what we spend time with our staff on, getting them to understand the why behind the reason we need to do what we need to do, what we choose to do, and giving them the chance to go and connect with country. So, if you are at a crowded CBD environment, the next staff picnic day, take it to a national park. Get people out into our environment to really understand and feel it. If you need a corporate day, feel free to come to Scenic World. I'm sure we can, my team can hook you up. Get in a little sales plug. It really is helping them understand why. And we find that as soon as we explain why to our team, they are so much more likely to jump on board and come along on the journey with us.
Now let's turn our attention to visitors. Can you remind me again where your visitors are coming from? Like how many would come from within Australia as opposed to overseas?
Yeah, so at the moment we're about 50-50 domestic and international. So of that domestic visitation, about 80% are from New South Wales, and the rest, Victoria, Queensland, and then the rest of the states. Internationally, the other 50%, our top visiting countries at the moment are Korea, UK, China, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, Vietnam. And so it's a really interesting mix, which is great. And we love our international guests. Our team regularly get Anthea's language school at our town hall meetings, where we learn all about the different cultures that come to Scenic World. And it's just so nice to be able to connect visitors from across the globe to the environment, because to your point, a lot of our visitors live in cities, in apartments, and don't get out in the natural environment. And that's ultimately why they're coming here. And so to be able to connect them with such an amazing, pristine piece of national park and World Heritage Area that lies on the edge of Scenic World is really amazing for us to be able to do.
Let's go into that in greater depth, because that's part of the role, as I understand. You see how you fit into this picture is that you're educating these visitors, you're providing an experience that's rooted in such a beautiful environment. So how are you influencing these people? Are you communicating your sustainability initiatives to them? How do you influence them? What sort of change do you expect in those visitors because they get to experience such a beautiful environment?
Yeah, as a journey of always evolve, as one of our values, we're not doing as much as we would like to be doing in that space. So at the moment, I would say just the immersion factor is what drives that connection to the environment. That being in our rainforest is really, or up on one of our cable cars overlooking the Jamison Valley, they are such special experiences, and you can't help but leave more connected to the environment without us even trying to educate. And I think there's a lot more we can do with a secondary layer of education, and some people want to absorb that, and some people just want to enjoy the environment they're in. So more to do in that space is the short answer, and we're looking forward to being able to do more of that. I mean, there's a lot of wider information we provide. You can get it on our website. We put out blog posts. We post on socials about it. But at the end of the day, people coming to the site is that core opportunity for them to connect with our environment.
So in terms of your sustainability initiatives and what you've been working on over the past few decades, what are your recommendations for other tourism operators on how they can be turning their attention and focus to sustainability and hopefully help educate the broader community in terms of their visitors?
So a couple of things. Inherently, I think if you go up to any business owner and go, what are your biggest, sustainability challenges? They'll probably be able to tell you a top 2 or 3, right? And so knowing inherently what they are and choosing some low-hanging fruit is really important. I gave the example earlier of the popcorn box. I think it's 10, I don't know the exact number, but in my head, it's probably 10% of our general waste is these popcorn boxes. And so it's like, I know they're low-hanging fruit, and it's taken us quite a while to find a solution for that. But that one thing can make a big difference, and it's finding the right supplier and changing its supplier. So it is about understanding the low-hanging fruit and working on that. You don't have to change everything overnight. Yes, to do something like going carbon neutral, you have to be able to commit to buying offsets, and that not every business has that ability. So the aim is to reduce your emissions first so that you have to buy less offsets. Seems obvious, but really critical to do. And the other thing is to look around within the tourism industry at the help that's out there. So the federal government has just put out a sustainability toolkit. Ecotourism Australia has a sustainability scorecard before you move into the accreditation rankings of ecotourism accredited. And so have a look out. There's heaps of tools that can help you identify that low-hanging fruit if you're not sure what it is to start your journey.
So what is better, do you think? Is it better to have a bottom-up approach and to start chipping away at stuff that's obvious and the low-hanging fruit? Or is it better to go full on out, develop a sustainability strategy top-down and then implement? What would you recommend?
I think it depends on the time and resources available in your business. If you have the ability to dedicate a resource to it, or not even a whole resource, but part of a resource and take that top-down approach, that's amazing. But if that's not what is possible for you, then find some low-hanging fruit and do something. Anything is better than nothing, and better to take some baby steps, because what we found is when it actually comes to doing climate active and making that jump to being carbon neutral, the steps that we had been doing over the past 10 years of the low-hanging fruit just makes it so much easier to do the bigger strategy when you get to it. So I don't think there is a right way to do it. I think it needs to be business specific and what works for that business. Smaller businesses might not have the capacity to be able to dedicate a resource to make it happen, but bigger businesses may. And so I think, find what works for you and just do something.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned carbon neutrality and climate active a few times here. Obviously, the big news is that you recently achieved climate active carbon neutral certification. Can you tell us more about this? Why did you pursue carbon neutrality and how did this all work? Tell us more.
Yeah, it's been on our agenda for a number of years now, probably close to 10 years. I'd been trying to get us to carbon neutral. One of the challenges was, the big hairy COVID in the room. Just as we were really ramping up to make it happen, our business got devastated by the bushfires and then by COVID. And so we just didn't have the internal capacity or the profit to be able to be buying offsets. But so pleased that now business is returning to normal, that we've been able to go down that path and get ourselves carbon neutral, which is really exciting.
So in terms of the whole philosophy that supports your carbon offset purchases and your climate active carbon neutrality, you mentioned previously that you've put decades of effort into reducing your waste and thus emissions from waste, into purchasing green power and a whole heap of other sustainability initiatives you've implemented. So tell us more about that. It's like the mitigation hierarchy on trying to reduce emissions at source first and only then purchasing carbon offsets. Tell us more about the philosophy that went into this.
Yeah, like you said, it's been a couple of decades in the making, really. Less conscious probably 20 years ago than more recently, but absolutely, you're biting off those chunks like buying green power. We knew that it was always going to be one of our biggest emissions, as we talked about earlier. The cable cars and the railway go up and down the hill, and so we knew that was going to be a relatively easy thing to start offsetting through purchasing green power without having to go down the full route of doing a carbon calculation and offsetting everything else. And so we did that. And then, as you said, we've been trying to reduce waste, trying to convert our gas appliances to electricity, because then they automatically end up on green power. And we're also doing things like partnering with the Explorer Bus, who are a local bus company that do the hop-on, hop-off tours. They're also carbon neutral. And so trying to get our visitors to buy a combined ticket, which means they can catch the train, which is a lower carbon form of travel, jump on the bus and travel to Scenic World that way. And that's working really well, having that bundled ticket available for sale. So there's lots of different avenues that we've been looking at to try and reduce emissions, and lots more to go. But they're some of the bigger ones we've been tackling.
Incredible. And what is your personal opinion on using carbon offsets to achieve that final step of being carbon neutral? What do you think of carbon offsets, and how can you make sure to select, or how did you make sure to select carbon offsets that are real, additional, and that make a real difference in terms of climate action? How did you go about this?
Yeah, honestly, it's hard. Especially the first time round, to be honest. And we did rely on you, Barbara, and your team to help us with that. I think it's a bit daunting. You get this giant long list of things you can buy. And what we really aimed to do was buy things that aligned with our values. So the offsets we purchased were around green energy, because we create a small amount of green energy, but not a lot, and around conservation. So we went through a bit of a training course with your team to make sure that we understood the different certifications attached to offsets, so that we could make sure that when we were out buying them, we bought ones that we thought aligned to the accreditation schemes that we were happy using. So it was a bit of a process, and it took us a good couple of months really to get that bedded in the first time. What we'd like to do now is take it up a notch, and with this year's offsets that we're purchasing now, we're actually going to go out to our team and give them a number of options after we've vetted a list first, got it down to a short list, and ask our team what they'd like us to be investing in as far as offsets, because it's really important for us that they're engaged with the process. Last year we didn't have the time to do that, and we didn't know enough, but I think this year we're a bit more educated. So I'm really looking forward to getting our team's input into what they want us to be offsetting with.
So for other organizations that are looking to embark on a similar journey, I mean, you start out with the target of wanting to be carbon neutral, and then you could go down this path. And there are obviously things that you didn't know, or you don't know from the get-go, because data collection is a bit time consuming. Purchasing carbon offsets isn't as simple as one would hope it would be. Are there any other hurdles in terms of achieving carbon neutral certification? And if so, what's the best strategy in overcoming them? And what would you tell other organizations to avoid or to help them go through this process in an efficient and effective manner?
Get good help. I think for a long time, I thought I would probably be able to figure it out myself or within the business, figuring out the carbon neutrality and how to do the carbon calculation. But at the end of the day, that science in itself has advanced so much in the last 15 years, and really reaching out to 100% renewables or an equivalent organization. There's plenty of different ones that run under the Climate Active scheme. Made all the difference, because it's one of those ones, you set a project in place, you've got a consultant helping you get there, and they're like, right, well, this will take 3 months and we're going to step through it. You're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to be organized and step through it, and we'll make it happen now. And so having a few deadlines is always excellent, and certainly helped us get through the process. So that was really great to help us. We couldn't have done it by ourselves. It does require someone with the expert and knowledge to get you through the process.
Yeah, I would agree. It was a lot simpler like 20 years ago, but now it is really advanced, and more information is there, more expectation on getting it right, and inclusive of all Scope 3 emission sources, and making sure to choose the right carbon offsets, and avoiding any negative reputation impact with purchasing the wrong carbon offsets. So it's like making sure that all boxes are ticked so that you can have this impact on the climate, and to have this climate action commitment in action. So you mentioned earlier, well, we're talking about challenges here, about overcoming them. And I know one of your biggest challenges, and you've mentioned it before in this interview, was firstly COVID, horrible for your business. But then also, of course, the bushfires. And I'm almost too scared to bring this question up, because I know what it means for you personally. So the Blue Mountains were quite heavily affected by horrendous bushfires. Obviously, this is one of the risks we will be experiencing more of in Australia as the climate heats up. We are going to have more bushfires. They're going to be more intensive in nature. They're going to occur more often. They're going to occur outside of the typical bushfire season. Can you tell us more about how you've dealt with bushfire risk in the past? And just the recent events, how has that affected you as a business?
Yeah, so the 2019 fires, made global news clearly, and normally we average on here at Scenic World that there's a bushfire in the Blue Mountains region, not necessarily at Scenic World, but fire in the Blue Mountains region that impacts our business about every 6 years. And we factor that into our forward forecasting, understanding that this will happen. Normally it takes 6 weeks to 3 months to recover from a bushfire and get our visitation back, because they do tend to be quite short emergency events, if I can call it that. The fires in 2019 were quite different to that. It took a full 6 months for us to start to really get visitation back to anywhere near normal. And that was because the fires lasted for so long and they were so broad across the greater Blue Mountains area. So, that's not what we're looking forward to in the future if that happens every time. Here at Scenic World, to help mitigate our bushfire risks, we have an asset protection program in place that we're working through, and it involves a number of things. It involves mechanical support such as sprinkler systems, hydrant tanks, and then also includes caring for country that I talked about earlier with David King, and vegetation management, so that we can protect our assets and make sure that we're okay if a fire comes through. Scenic World is in the lucky location of facing southeast on the escarpment, which is less fire prone than facing somewhere like north or northwest. However, we know that does not make it fire proof. So Our temperate rainforest also protects us to a degree because it's an area that holds a lot of moisture. But in times like 2019, it was relatively dry down there as well. And if a fire had come across the valley, it would have made it through to our infrastructure. So we're working hard to continue to put additional fire protection measures in place across our buildings and the cable cars and their infrastructure to make sure we're okay if we do end up being impacted directly by a fire.
And it's quite admirable to see the sophisticated processes you have in place, because obviously you know about the risk, you know about the impact that it can cause to your business, and you're provisioning for that in your financial system, like taking that into consideration. Like every 6 years, you've got that event, you set aside funds to cover that. That's really great foresight, and I think other organizations can learn from that as well. I think they should also look at the climate risks and make sure that they are covered. Obviously, you're affected by bushfires. Others might be more affected by floods. Others might be more affected by rising sea levels. Agricultural businesses might be more affected by chronic changes such as precipitation changes, etc. So I think that's a standard practice that more businesses should undertake. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think one of the benefits we have that not all businesses has is we've been on the same site operating now for 80 years with the same family running it. And so you get to know your site pretty well and the risks associated with it. So I should say one of the changes that we're seeing, one of the climate change risks is, we talk a lot about bushfire, and it seems like that's a really inherent and logical risk for our site, and it is. But on the flip side, significant rain events are also starting to impact our site in negative ways, and we're having to really think about how do we manage the site for those. So, in the broader Blue Mountains National Park, you would have seen there's been a considerable change in the way they manage the national parks over the last 5 years through the La Nina events and the significant rains they've had. And similarly on site, we've had to look at that as well. The risk of trees coming down, the risk of rocks falls, all significantly increase when you get significant rain. And so we've had to put in place a number of management measures across the site to make sure that we're keeping our people safe and our infrastructure as safe as we can in those sort of events as well. So not necessarily what you think of first when you think the Blue Mountains and climate change, but certainly one that's on our radar now that wasn't on it 10 years ago as a result.
How did you manage the process? Did you get together as a management team and look at those risks, or did you base it on pure historical experience? How did you go about this?
Yeah, so part of our ecotourism certification is to have a climate change risk register. So certainly as part of our work maintaining that accreditation, we've got a climate change risk register that the leadership team got together on and worked through, and as part of that, you come up with mitigations and controls that you need to have for your climate change risk. So, great templates are available out and around. So we used, why reinvent the wheel? Use templates already available and tailored them, of course, to Scenic World and made sure that we've now got controls in place across those broader climate risks that we're seeing.
Excellent. It makes you such a more resilient organization as a result. Now, we talked about physical risks in terms of floods, rain events, bushfires, etc. But what about transition risks? So transition risks, as we shift as society and our economy, we shift to a low carbon or net zero economy over time. And that comes a shift in consumer preferences, for instance, or our opinion on certain things like taking a plane to go overseas. Do you foresee that to be something that's relevant for you in the future in terms of transition risk, looking at your overseas visitors who obviously have to come here by aeroplane? Is that going to be a problem, and what can be done about this?
It's an interesting one because I think people don't want to stop traveling. And so there will be pressure to find ways to make airplane travel more sustainable. There's a lot of work going into sustainable aviation fuels at the moment. And so it will be interesting to see how that works. I mean, in periods of bushfire or SARS or COVID's sort of an extreme event. But if you go back to something like SARS, our business had to pivot away from international visitors because they just dropped off really overnight for a period of time. Like I said, it wasn't as bad as COVID and shutting borders, but we have seen a number of significant events over the last 20 to 30 years, again, a benefit of running a business for a long time, where that international visitation dropped off. And so our business has had an experience in having to pivot to domestics, and make sure that our domestic visitors are having a great experience and coming back. And we do that through putting on events and making sure that we're driving locals through social media. So there's ways to manage that, and we've done it in the past. But I do expect that the industry, the broader tourism, leisure, aviation industry, will come up with ways to create more sustainable travel, because there's a, you know, that we need to, and it's on the way. It's just not here yet.
Yeah, we must as a society, and I'm also hoping that sustainable air fuels will become available more broadly and widely in the near future, because I also often go overseas to see my family in Austria. And of course, you know, taking a plane makes me feel bad. But at the same time, I'd love to see my family. And what if this problem could be solved with technology? And what if we had sustainable air fuel that would solve this problem? I'd love for that to be in place.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So after having heard all of the beautiful initiatives you're working on, what's your bag? What's your big, hairy, audacious goal going forward? Or is there more that can be achieved?
Absolutely. I mean, Scenic World doesn't operate in a bubble. We're part of the broader Blue Mountains tourism economy, and then beyond that, New South Wales. And I'm involved heavily in tourism at our local Blue Mountains level. And I think for me, it's getting the rest of the Blue Mountains industry to be carbon neutral. You know, having a carbon neutral destination here in the Blue Mountains would be phenomenal. Scenic World's a great first step. It helps prove to others that if a big business can do it, you know, hopefully we can help little businesses do it now and take our learnings out into the local tourism sphere here in the mountains. So that's my big hairy goal, is to get the whole of the Blue Mountains carbon neutral, which would be amazing.
A big task, obviously, but then again, it's hopefully going to be easy in an area like you described earlier, with everyone being so connected to the environment. So I think the Blue Mountains is the prime example of where this is absolutely possible. And then hopefully you'll be able to affect everyone else to be more sustainable as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the key takeaway message that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think it starts small. Make sure that you are getting that low-hanging fruit in your business and making sure that you're just doing something. It doesn't have to be everything all at once. Start chipping away at it, because it might not be tomorrow, but in 12 months, 2 years or 5 years, you'll suddenly get to the point where you're like, oh, I'm doing enough that suddenly I can be ecotourism accredited, or actually carbon neutrality is not very expensive now because I spent the last 5 years reducing my waste, reducing my energy and reducing my emissions. So just get started.
Such a good point. So how can people connect with you if they want to find out more?
Straight through Scenic World. We're pretty easy to find, scenicworld.com.au, or you can find me on LinkedIn, of course.
Fantastic. And we'll put those links in the show notes of this episode. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Anthea. It was such a great interview. Thank you.
My pleasure.
That was Anthea Hammond, Managing Director at Scenic World, talking about their sustainability journey and carbon neutrality achievements. If you know another person who you think will enjoy this podcast, please let them know so that more people can hear about best practice stories of how organizations are moving to net zero emissions. Remember, to reach net zero emissions, aim high, always be curious, and act now. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode.